Welcome to the Just Ingredients podcast. I'm Cara Lynn, and here we talk all things nourishing to the mind, body, and soul. This is a place where you can find just good ingredients to life. Today we have Dr. Darren Candow, a professor and the director of the Aging Muscle and Bone Health Laboratory at the University of Regina in Canada. Dr. Candow's research focuses on developing effective lifestyle interventions that combine nutrition, especially creatine monohydrate, with resistance training to enhance muscles, bone, and brain health. Dr. Candow serves on several editorial boards and is a fellow of the International Society of Sports Nutrition and has published over 135 peer-reviewed journal manuscripts. I am so excited for him to share his vast knowledge of creatine with us. So welcome to the show, Dr. Candow.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Really excited.
Before we begin, will you tell my listeners just a little bit about yourself? I shared a lot. You have done a lot, but maybe just a little bit about yourself, your background, and why you even started studying about creatine.
Yeah, well, I'm here in Canada. I'm a professor at the University of Regina in Saskatchewan, Canada. And I kind of got into creatine research by a little bit of an accident. My undergrad degree was in cell biology, which was great, but I took a class in exercise physiology, and things really sort of to fall into place for me. I could visualize how the body adapts to not only exercise, but nutrition. And then I went to Saskatchewan and did my master's and PhD under the mentorship of Dr. Phil Chillibeck, and a good colleague of mine at the same time, who's now in industry, Dr. Darren Burke. He was doing research on creatine. I was actually doing research on amino acids, primarily glutamine, because glutamine at the time was the big rage. And he was starting to see some really, really favorable results for young athletes, primarily getting, bigger, stronger, faster, and also recovering quite rapidly. And I started to really get involved in some of his research, and it sort of paved the way or changed my direction from a non-essential amino acid to creatine, which is kind of like an amino acid compound. And then we started to get into different avenues, female health, especially across the lifespan, and then in older adults. So it was kind of by accident. I'm really glad it was by accident, because I've been doing creatine research primarily now for the last almost 2 decades. And there's a lot of momentum, as you alluded to earlier on. So I'm super excited to speak with you today and talk about all the health and exercise benefits or applications of creatine.
Yeah, I'm really excited to ask you a lot of questions because, like I was telling you earlier, I do sell a creatine. And ever since we've started selling this, we get so many questions every day. And it's especially women are like, wait, we can take this. This is good for us. And then a lot of parents saying, I do not want my teenagers taking this. This is terrible. So we're going to go through all the myths, the questions, everything. But I want to start at the very beginning. What is creatine? Is creatine monohydrate the same thing as what you see on all the store shelves? Is that also just creatine? And maybe let's just start there. What is it?
So creatine is naturally found in all our cells within the body. It's kind of like an amino acid compound. It was discovered in the 1800s before ATP or adenosine triphosphate.
Oh, wow.
And it basically helps maintain the energy currency of our cell when we're performing activities of daily living. So, for example, exercise, shoveling the driveway, walking stairs, going to vote last night in your country. So you all had to use your muscles and movement. And that utilizes ATP, but luckily this molecule called creatine helps maintain those levels so you can actually maintain those activities of daily living or exercise performance. It's a nitrogen-containing compound from 3 amino acids, but we only produce it in 2 areas of the body, which is very interesting. One is not muscle, which a lot of people think it must be there. It's actually produced in reactions primarily in the liver, and I'm sure we'll talk about this. The other new area is in the brain.
Okay, so does the body naturally make creatine, or we have to also get it from the diet?
Yeah, so the amount that you're actually producing naturally is enough to maintain normal, healthy functioning. But evidence research or base research shows now that if you take in a little bit more through the diet, and foods that contain creatine are primarily red meat and seafood, or through supplementation practices, a small amount in addition to what we're naturally producing has shown to have some substantial beneficial effects from muscle to potentially bone and cognition. So the technical answer is no, but if you can take a little bit more, there is some beneficial effects.
Okay, so for those that are plant-based then, or vegan, they purely would have to supplement with it then.
That is correct. And the good thing is most reputable companies that are making creatine or containing creatine in their product, they're all vegan-based, so they are applicable to anybody emphasizing a vegetarian, vegan, or a plant-based diet.
So I want to talk to you about like how to use it and dosage and timing and things like that. But I first want to just talk about the benefits of creatine, because you talked about it's helping with the energy of the cell. And so does it also support then, I'm assuming, the mitochondria?
It has the potential to maintain or help the mitochondria. It helps shuttle ATP a little bit quicker from the mitochondria into the cytoplasm where proteins such as actin and myosin are using that during muscle contraction. But the other benefits is that probably helps explain why individuals who take creatine or a slightly elevated amount can get an increase in lean tissue mass, decrease in body fat, which is a new type of finding, definitely improvement in muscle performance, primarily strength, which is hugely applicable for aging adults. And then the other big thing is now there is application for postmenopausal females primarily to get some bone benefits. And from the neck up, we're actually seeing benefits now in cognition and memory, primarily during times of metabolic stress. So when the brain is stressed, such as sleep deprivation or jet lag, that's when creatine really seems to come to the rescue to the amount that's naturally being produced in the brain.
Oh, that's interesting about the brain. So what about just regular stress in life? Because I feel like all of us are stressing too much every day. So does it help with that kind of stress as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We think that the amount being produced by the brain is enough to maintain basic stressors of daily activities. You know, when you're stuck in traffic, you miss an appointment, whichever it is. The brain has about 1 to 3 grams being synthesized, we think, on a daily basis, very similar to the liver. But during times of acute or chronic metabolic stress, the best lines of evidence come from forced sleep deprivation, where individuals volunteer to be sleep deprived all overnight. And then when they're given a whole bunch of cognitive tasks the next day, they seem to perform way better than those on placebo. Jet lag comes to mind, students staying up all night, cramming for a midterm, those working graveyard shifts, or those with young children who have intermittent sleep. I think we can all identify with that. As an academic, I feel like I'm sleep deprived all the time. I feel foggy. I need coffee a lot more. But creatine seems to come to the rescue. Again, maybe that's where the brain is saying, I need help from circulation or supplementation. That'll maybe bring those creatine levels up a little bit higher. And it's sort of, the evidence goes back to almost clinical depression and anxiety, where creatine is really starting to have a lot of beneficial effects. The common denominator with a lot of clinical populations is that the amount of creatine in the brain is reduced compared to a healthy control. So maybe supplementation just bring those levels back up to normal or elevated amount. From a practical application, I fly to Italy in 2 weeks, and I'm very susceptible to jet lag and time zone changes. So I'll actually take about 10 to 20 grams for the week before in hope that it maintains cognition and memory when I'm there. And then I'm really susceptible to jet lag when I come back to North America. I take that again for the following week. I've done that a few times, and it really seems to help maintain cognition and memory. I'm an N of 1, but again, I do see the evidence behind it.
So interesting. Okay, so I clearly understand that it helps with the cognition, the brain, when there is the sleep deprivation, the jet lag. But what about on a daily basis? If someone's getting enough sleep, does creatine help with the brain function and things like that?
Yeah, and the answer is probably no. If the individual is exercising, adequate sleep, young, non-stressed, the brain is making enough. The brain also has a blood-brain barrier, which prevents circulating creatine from getting in. So unless you're metabolically stressed on a continuous basis, don't expect a lot of benefits from creatine. We hope it has application for older adults prone to dementia and Alzheimer's, and some clinical trials will be starting in those areas. But for those who are getting proper sleep, adequate health, nutrition, you're not going to notice any cognitive effects. That's not to say you may not get the muscle benefits from creatine.
Okay, you just mentioned blood-brain barriers. So is there something that helps creatine cross the blood-brain barrier better? Yeah,
there's a couple things. One we like to promote is exercise. We think the blood flow can be a nice vehicle, but there's a compound, abbreviated GAA, it's guanidino acetoacetate, and a great colleague of mine in Norway, Serge Ostiak, has clearly shown that the addition of this precursor for creatine in combination with creatine may help elevate creatine transport into the tissue a little bit quicker. However, this is important to note, it's not been shown to be superior from an efficacy compared to creatine alone. So there's a couple analogs to the molecule which may help, but nothing is showing any superiority or a safety profile of natural creatine, probably because when creatine monohydrate comes into our body, the water molecules dissolve in the stomach from hydrochloric acid. So that intact creatine molecule is identical to what our body's producing. Again, going to the point why the safety of creatine is so superior. If our body doesn't like it or recognize it, you actually pee it down the toilet quite readily. So that's why the safety is so superior.
Interesting. Okay, so I want to ask you a couple other health benefits. I have heard that creatine can help lower inflammation. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest mechanisms, primarily in the brain, actually. So if you're ever wondering why it seems to have a brain beneficial effect, primarily in rodent models, it seems to have an anti-inflammatory or anti-catabolic effect, definitely to the muscle. And we know this because there are a few studies that have looked at long-term aerobic exercise. And those that took creatine before they run a marathon or ultramarathon had substantial reductions in inflammation proteins in the blood compared to placebo. So in other words, creatine has the anti-inflammatory effects. Is it at the same level as an NSAID like ibuprofen or Aleve? Probably not. But there is some mechanisms to show it has anti-inflammatory effects. And that's probably why it has great benefits for older adults. Because unfortunately, when you hit the fourth decade and above, you have something called low-grade inflammation or inflammation aging that is elevated. And it's these cytokines or proteins that seem to be accumulating in the blood, causing havoc, so to speak, and creatine may decrease inflammation. So that's why we think creatine is considered a healthy aging or anti-aging compound in your regimen. It may have some beneficial effects there.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so talking about anti-aging or aging, I should say, is creatine something in your body like, let's say, hyaluronic acid, for instance? I know that decreases as you age. Does creatine decrease as you age?
For the most part, yes. Only we see this in the lower limbs. So this is an interesting thing. When we look at a small meta-analysis, the amount of creatine in the body seems to be reduced from a whole body perspective, but the kinetics of creatine seem to be also reduced more preferentially in the lower limbs. Now, the biggest muscles are in the lower limbs, and so maybe as we get older, we're not using these muscles as much. Maybe we're taking the elevator or escalator. We're not running and jogging. Maybe we're driving our vehicle more often. So one of the key things for those that are 40 and above listening, never miss leg day. Use your leg muscles as much as you can. And one of the big reasons is maybe that the activity as we get older becomes more minor or reduced. We don't usually engage in high intensity activities. So if you're 40 and above, please incorporate leg exercise as much as possible. That won't actually increase your creatine levels. It'll just help maintain it. And that's why we see really good results for older adults, primarily regarding strength in regards to creatine supplementation.
Okay, talking about aging, though, let's talk about heart health. Is creatine linked to heart health as well?
It has no adverse effects on hypertension or blood pressure. It actually has some substantial beneficial effects for the myocardium around the heart. It could have applications from a recovery standpoint for cardiac rehab. And again, that mechanism of anti-inflammatory or decreasing inflammation seems to be there. The other big thing is it reduces reactive oxidative species or oxidative stress that we produce when we're exercising or around pollutions or toxins. So again, there is that anti-inflammatory, anti-catabolic nature there, and that can have some application, not just for clinical populations, but for older adults prone to more chronic diseases such as stroke, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes comes to mind as well.
Okay, so with the older generation, or actually any generation, I want to ask this, we know it helps with energy, but is it energy just while you're working out, or is this like something they can use every day? Because I know like the elderly get so tired. Can it help them with energy every day?
Yeah, I recommend to focus on this nutrient if you're considering supplementation or in the diet on a daily basis. The main areas will be muscle, bone, and the brain. And it may help maintain activities of daily living, even on the days that you don't technically exercise, for example. So, for example, if your grandfather is going to shovel snow tomorrow, whichever it is, that takes a lot of energy. Performing activities around the house take a lot of energy. Now, creatine really works under this system called the anaerobic energy system, which is probably the most intense energy system we have. But if you're just out for a general walk, really, really light intensity, creatine is not going to have a great profound benefit there. But if you're adding in more effort, and again, the more effort you put in, that's where creatine may have some of the substantial beneficial effects.
Okay, let's talk about creatine with muscle building and muscle strength then, because I hear from guys all the time, creatine is just adding water to the muscles so that the muscles look bigger. That's all it's doing. So tell us how creatine is really helping the muscle.
Yes, so one of the most purported and documented mechanisms is that creatine is an osmotic compound, so it likes to take water with it when it gets into our cells. And yes, what happens is typically on a very high dose, creatine will cause water to enter your muscle, and therefore the intracellular environment becomes more hydrated. That's a really, really, really good thing. I can't stress this enough. Having more water swelling the cell membrane, the plasma membrane or sarcolemma when it comes to muscle, that sort of stimulates a whole bunch of things we think increases lean tissue mass or strength. So for example, in a better aqueous or hydrated environment, satellite cells, transcription factors, growth factors all get turned on. So yes, by having more water come into the cell, we think that's one of the main reasons why creatine seems to increase lean tissue mass and regional measures of muscle strength. However, if you make a slight error during the first week of creatine by taking too much, and this is what they call creatine loading, it's primarily only designed for athletes, but it's a really rapid way to saturate your body. That's where they want you to take 20 grams of creatine a day for about 5 to 7 days. It's a very rapid and effective way to load the body. However, you can experience some GI tract irritation, and that's where we typically see primarily in young females net water retention, where the number on the scale may go up by 1 all the way up to 3 kilograms. We do not recommend the loading phase. I think for anybody listening, considering supplementation, you can take as little as 3 grams a day and take that for an entire month. That will get you to the same levels in the muscle. 3 grams a day is about half a teaspoon. It's not a lot. We also use 0.1 gram per kilogram. So if you're 70 kilograms, you're taking 7 grams a day. If you know an offensive lineman who's 100 kilograms, they would take 10 grams a day. And you don't need to take this all at once. You can divide it up into smaller dosages. So I personally take at least 10 grams a day. I take 5 grams with breakfast in the morning, and then I drink 5 grams in water during my workout. That's just an easy, consistent way for me to get that in there. So again, the loading phase could be good for the athletes, but I certainly would not recommend that for the average person, especially if they're just starting out. I think that would cause some GI tract irritation or weight gain. And that's probably one of the main reasons young females withdraw from creatine. They don't like the feeling of it.
That's so good to know. So someone like me that just works out every day just to stay healthy, but I'm not looking to, bulk or anything necessarily, I would just take about 5 grams a day.
Yeah, 3 to 5 grams a day. Now, please note, this is just from a muscle perspective. If you're looking for bone benefits as you get older, you're going to need a bit more. And then if you're also looking for brain benefits, the best studies suggest higher dose as well. So we don't know the optimal dose to hit all those tissues, but when I did the math, if you're looking to improve bone potentially, muscle and brain, about 10 grams a day on average seems to be the average dose to hit those areas. But some people might be watching and say, I don't care about my bone as I get older. I don't care about my brain. I only care about the size of my bicep. Okay, that's funny, but you only need as little as 3 to 5 grams a day. However, I hope most people are becoming more aware of the total body health benefits, especially the anti-inflammatory effects.
Okay, well, you talked about timing of when to take this a little bit, but it's the big debate out there. Do you take it before you work out or after you work out? And so does it matter?
Yeah, unlike caffeine, the timing actually does not matter, which is great. You can actually take this at any time of the day. However, one of the cool things with creatine is that exercise or muscle contractions seem to really stimulate its uptake into muscle. We don't know if that's the same in bone or brain, but we think so. So a great time to take it is in close proximity to exercise. You can take it before you work out. You can drink it during or after, but please note you'll probably get the same benefits if you take it in the morning or evening, bolus dose or smaller, more frequent dosages. I wouldn't take any less than about 1 gram per serving. That seems to be not enough to accumulate in the blood. So again, it's up to you, whatever's consistent. And again, I take 5 with breakfast in the morning and I take 5 during my workout. That's a small scale, yeah.
Do you laugh then at all the fitness articles out there where they all debate over taking it before or after?
Yeah, I do. We've been very fortunate to collaborate with researchers worldwide, really looking at the cellular data. And when you compare the results of groups that took it before, in the morning, after, there's no difference. So it is interesting. It's kind of a myth, but there's so many myths on creatine. I'm fortunate that we try to debunk these myths to get real evidence out to the consumer.
Well, I want to ask you some of those myths, and I'm going to in just a second, but we've talked about how it's good for the muscles and the brain, but you keep mentioning bones. How is it good for the bone? Is it increasing the bone density, and how so?
Yeah, there's been a handful of studies now, and overall, creatine has some small bone benefits, primarily in older adults, and this is primarily in adults 50 and above, or postmenopausal females. We don't really have any good data on the perimenopausal transition or, of course, the premenopausal transition. But what happens is these osteoblast cells, or these cells that are involved in sort of making bigger, stronger bones, they use creatine for fuel, just like your vehicle uses gasoline. So these osteoblast cells seem to become more energized. And in the handful of clinical trials we've done, it seems to have some smaller but substantial bone benefits. In postmenopausal females, for example, it reduced the rate of bone mineral density loss compared to placebo, and it also seemed to improve bone strength. So it did not increase bone mineral density, but it seemed to preserve the skeleton, which could have favorable effects as the individual becomes 60, 70, 80 years of age. Maybe the skeleton is a bit stronger, so when that individual does fall, they may not suffer a fracture. So we're sort of hoping to have some clinical benefits from that. Again, taking creatine for substantial bone benefits, we just don't see the evidence there. But there is some evidence to suggest it has the potential, and there's no detriment whatsoever. There's no reason that you can take creatine and have any detrimental effects to bone density.
All right, I'm going to start asking you some of these myths that at least I've heard. I'm sure others have heard also. First one, maybe you just say if it's a myth or a fact. Creatine can lead to hair loss.
It's a myth. Don't look at me, but it's a myth, yes.
Why is that out there?
This is the most popular myth next to creatine adversely affecting kidney function. It was a study done in rugby players over 2 decades ago, and they took a high dose of creatine over 20 grams a day for 7 days, and the hormone DHT, which is a derivative of testosterone and linked to hair follicle loss, was elevated. But just because a hormone is acutely elevated, that doesn't correlate to any phenotypical change in the cell or outward appearance. They did not measure hair thinning, hair follicle loss, or hair cross-sectional area. And the DHT levels actually rose, but they were still within the normal physiological range. It's very similar if you go to your doctor and you measure cholesterol. There's a range from a low end to a high end. So everybody took that data and said, well, correlation must be causation, in a sense that the hormone went up. That's definitely going to explain my baldness. I was going bald way before I took creatine. Other researchers in the area are bald. That does not necessarily mean that we are actually the cause of the effect. There's a study going on now in the Middle East actually measuring hair cross-sectional area. So I'm really excited to see these results out. But as a scientist, we also have to conclude, since there's no research to show it definitely doesn't, we can't really answer this. So again, there's no evidence to suggest it does. We haven't actually had the study to say it definitely doesn't. But again, the mechanisms are just not there.
Okay, that's really interesting. All right, well, you touched upon the second one. People say all the time, creatine affects the kidney health.
Yeah, so creatine is the synthesis of this product. It starts in the kidney. And then, of course, we excrete creatine in the form of creatinine. So again, for your listeners, creatine and creatinine are different. Creatinine is the metabolic byproduct. And when people take creatine supplementation, the amount of creatinine in the blood typically will go up acutely. And that could be a false positive to your nephrologist or general practitioner, meaning your GFR rate is too low. It's not filtering properly. So for those taking creatine in the diet or supplementation, please let your doctor know you're on creatine. It's very likely your creatinine levels will be elevated and your eGFR levels will be reduced. That does not necessarily mean you have kidney issues. And randomized control trial over time, multiple times, have clearly shown that creatine poses no adverse effects on liver or kidney function.
Oh, I'm so glad you just said that. I'm going to use that quote over and over because that is one of the biggest questions I get. Okay, another myth or fact. Does it dehydrate the muscles or the body?
Total myth. Is actually does the opposite. It superhydrates the muscle, and of course, it really can have beneficial effects in hot environments by trapping water in the muscle, and that helps maintain hydration status.
Well, I hear all the time, though, oh, if you're taking creatine, you've got to drink because it dehydrates you. So why do they think they have to drink a lot?
Yeah, that's kind of another myth. It will cause a potentially, depending on the dose, an increase in intracellular water retention. So some people will get more thirsty or consume more water to maintain the amount of water in the bloodstream or the plasma. But there's no real reason to consume more water. I always recommend it because I'm hoping they're exercising, and obviously having more water coming in has some beneficial effects.
Okay, another myth. Creatine causes weight gain.
It can. So this is an important distinction. If you take the loading phase, you will expect an increase in weight in about the first week. But the funny thing is, if you take a proper lower dose, when you start creatine and stop, your weight is almost never changed. This is quite interesting. What we think happens is you might reduce a little bit of fat mass, and you might put on a little bit of lean tissue mass, so maybe the number stays the same. But at the end of the day, if you take a smaller dose, maybe you might get a bit of weight gain during the first 7 to 10 days, but your body does adjust. So overall, we say no, because at the end of the day, when you look at pre-post, we don't see any change. But I have to let your viewers know that loading phase, you should definitely experience some water retention and net weight gain. It's done improperly.
But if you're not loading, then it should be fine.
And if your body weight stays the same, it's very likely you put on lean tissue and decrease fat mass. So there's a difference in the composition of those tissues. That's correct.
Okay. And the loading is really only for hardcore athletes, is what you're saying.
So, if you are coming back from ACL surgery and you really need a rapid recovery, professional athletes, upcoming Olympics down the road, I think it's for the elite subpopulation. I think for the average individual, start with 3 grams a day. You could probably break that up into 2 1.5 gram dosages in the morning and afternoon. See how you feel, work your way up to 5, and then as you approach the 4th decade and above, you may want to start taking 8 or a little bit more grams per day, because we think aging does jeopardize creatine kinetics a little bit more. But if you're 14 years of age, 8 years of age, 20, you could start with 3 to 5 grams a day. Children and adolescents can easily take creatine. The safety profile is there. And again, we're naturally producing it. If the human body doesn't like it, it'll just excrete it. So that's why the safety profile is exceptional.
Okay, so let's actually talk about kids and teenagers, because that's actually one of my myths, just because I get a lot of parents that will write in and say like, oh, this is terrible for teenagers. I can't believe you're selling this. So why is there that myth that it's terrible for teenagers? I'm
not sure where the myth came from, really, because there's been exceptional review articles and looking at experimental studies by Chad Gersick and Andrew Yagam in the United States. And they clearly show that taking a recommended dosage is 0.1 gram per day. Obviously, they're smaller in size, or 3 to 5 grams a day. That's the same amount as eating a salmon steak. The human body will process it. So in theory, as soon as you're born, you could actually start taking creatine because you're naturally producing. And that's why in Australia, the pregnant female and for fetal development is having some really good potential benefits. So I really struggle to see anybody on the planet that can't take creatine, and you may or may not experience any of the benefits, but I'm not seeing any justification or mechanisms why they can't. In other words, if a child was to consume a hamburger or a salmon steak, why can they consume that, but they can't consume a little bit more supplementation? So the cool thing with creatine, do you need supplements? 100% no. They're getting it in the diet. So if you don't want to take supplements for the parents, great. You may just want to emphasize, hey, Joe, do you like seafood? Yes. Seafood is really good for you, or red meat, but the ethical treatment of animals, maybe you're allergic to seafood, maybe you're a vegan or vegetarian, all these issues come into play. But from a scientific answer, there's no reason that a child or adolescents can't take this.
Okay, so another myth is that, or I should say people write in about this. They ask, I've heard that creatine for a teenager isn't beneficial until they have gone through puberty and are able to really build muscle mass.
Yeah, no, that's 100% false. There's no logic to that. It's kind of like the myth of saying children shouldn't lift weights. Of course they should. My God, the earlier you start, they get an increase in coordination, neuromuscular development, increase in muscle size. because when that mountain starts to break down in the fourth decade, you really hope you had more. So these are myths that I hear all the time, and that's why I love coming on shows like this to really get the science out there, to try to tell people, hey, what you read maybe is not correct, and trust the science in this case.
Yeah, that's so interesting. All right, you touched upon, you were saying in Australia, they're doing a study with pregnant people doing it or taking creatine. So I'm assuming you're saying it's safe for pregnant and breastfeeding moms?
No, so a little bit of caution here. So Dr. Stacey Ellery is the world's leader when it comes to pregnancy. And most of the speculation, and we have a big paper coming out on this right now, is it's based on the animal model, primarily using sheep or rodent model. And it seems, again, that an anti-inflammatory effect, but subjectively, females who were pregnant actually, in some of the subjective questionnaires, had more energy. They didn't complain with as much adverse effects. But there is potential for fetal development from the animal-based model. But we definitely need randomized controlled trials in humans to make sure it's completely safe. Again, the mechanisms are there to suggest it is safe, but we've been very cautious here. So again, anybody listening, pregnancy, thinking of it, please talk to your medical practitioner to make sure creatine is right for you. And if it is, make sure you're taking the extra step to talk about a safe dose and practical applications there. But again, we have a massive paper coming out with the International Society of Sport Nutrition, where we look at all the data. It is small, but again, there's potential to have some beneficial effects there. But for everybody listening, caution is advised. Please talk to your medical practitioner.
And the same with breastfeeding?
Yeah, we don't think the mammary gland has the potential, but we do know that creatine can get in the breast milk from a diet or supplementation phase there again. So anything that falls in that category, please go talk to your medical practitioner and to make sure it's right for you.
And are there others that should avoid it? Any other health issues or not necessarily?
No, the big one that's starting to get a lot of press is cancer. And I think there's been some rodent models where they took super physiological doses of creatine, and that actually increased the size of a tumor or increased cancer rate. But when you look at the human data, we don't see that at all. Actually, it has a lot of anti-cancer properties, primarily from the anti-inflammatory effects. So we're not really seeing any effects. We're starting a few studies now on prostate and breast cancer survivors at the University of South Carolina. But overall, it seems to have some beneficial effects in that clinical population. But we're not really seeing another population that may have a roadblock, if you will, to it.
Okay, good to know. Let's take a quick break to hear from our show sponsor. Looking for a toxic-free nail polish option for your kids? Paint those piggies with Piggy Paint Nail Polish, a premium brand trusted by parents. Piggy Paint is a water-based formula that dries hard and is free of all harsh, smelly chemicals. With over 40 fun, vibrant shades available, this non-toxic nail polish is kid-friendly and safe for all ages. Enjoy gift sets, scented options, accessories, and don't forget the nail art. It makes the perfect gift, so grab your Piggy Paint today with 20% off at www.piggypaint.com/justingredients, or use code JUSTINGREDIENTS at checkout for the same offer. Now back to the show. All right, so another maybe myth, one more, is loading the same thing as cycling, or not necessarily? Because I will hear like, oh, you should take creatine for 3 weeks, take a week off, or a month and take a week off, or whatever. So is loading different than cycling, and is cycling beneficial?
Right. So loading is a little bit different than cycling. So the loading phase, again, is 20 grams a day, approximately for at least 2 days. Usually it's about 7. And then after that, you reduce it all the way down to 2 to 5 grams a day on a low maintenance dose. Cycling is where you take creatine for about 3 to 4 weeks, and then you take 3 to 4 weeks off. And the theory there is that if you're taking creatine for about 4 weeks and you stop, those elevated levels take actually about 4 weeks to come back to baseline. So people may decide to cycle it based financially, although creatine is really, really cheap. They're traveling, whatever it is, but they are different. Now, more important question is the evidence say that you should cycle it? No, there's not. It is a myth. We don't downregulate our natural creatine production by taking supplementation. However, when you fill up the room or your muscles with creatine, and it's totally full, there's no more other area to pack creatine in, you sort of down-regulate your uptake into muscle. So I can see why people say cycling might be good. I now argue recently, there's other tissues that will take up creatine, bone and brain. So I say, hey, you know what? Maybe don't cycle it. I've been taking creatine daily for decades because I'm hoping now that if my muscles are full, some of that other stuff would trickle into your bone and brain besides being excreted as creatinine. And another in line with that is most people say, do I take creatine just on the days I work out? We now think you should take it every day and hope it can trickle into those other tissues.
That is so good to know because everybody just talks about creatine with the muscles. They never are talking about the brain or the bone.
Yeah, and I'm taking it also from the anti-inflammatory. So heighten your immune system, not boost it, but really your cells of the immune system rely on creatine as well. So again, it's there to have a whole body health perspective.
Okay, talking about that inflammation, just really quick, because I talk about it quite often. And, you can obviously go to your doctor and get your blood work done and see where your inflammation levels are. So is this a supplement that's, strong enough to just take to lower those inflammation markers, or you've got to take it with some other things?
Yeah, the evidence is not there. It's usually in response to exercise or if you have chronic elevated diseases. We see potentially benefits for people with IBS or other autoimmune diseases. That's primarily been shown in the animal model, but there is theory there to have some anti-inflammatory effects. Again, cancer comes to mind, IBS, other autoimmune diseases. The evidence is equivocal on arthritis, osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis, but there is potential there. It's not a drug. It's not going to be like Advil where it inhibits the COX-2 or COX enzyme. It seems to work other ways by decreasing cytokines or these inflammatory markers. Some of your viewers may have heard of IL-6 or tumor necrosis factor alpha. It seems to decrease the amount of response post-exercise. So for those listening that are exercising maybe 5-6 times a week, running marathons, 2-a-day practices for athletes, that's where creatine may help with recovery, allowing the individual to get back into the gym, on the field, whichever it is. Yeah.
So it almost sounds like a necessity for all athletes and all those working out.
Yeah, it seems to be one of those things that we would definitely recommend either from an anabolic perspective or a recovery anti-catabolic perspective as well. So I would be shocked if at the Olympic Games recently in Paris that most athletes in certain areas were not taking creatine. It seems to be a staple, just like protein or caffeine nowadays. The IOC lists creatine as one of 5 they endorse with good evidence, so I can see why that is. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, though, about this. Now you've gotten me on a different topic because I still have one more myth to ask you. But I know creatine, a lot of athletes can't take it unless it's like NSF Sports certified, showing that they can take it. So is not all creatine created equal?
That's correct. So when I say creatine, I'm only referring to primarily creatine monohydrate, the one that's been shown to be safe and effective. There's a lot of other marketed forms out there. But at the end of the day, if it's creatine, it has to get into the muscle, and why mess with a good thing? Now, the other thing is you just touch on, if you're considering a supplementation, please make sure on the bottle it has a label of certified safe or NSF certified safe. That means a third-party lab has looked at the ingredients in the compound. But if it's combined with other ingredients, we just don't know about the bioavailability there as well. So you're right, athletes need to take something that's certified safe. Most reputable companies that contain creatine monohydrate have done their work because it's become such a big area with performance-enhancing drugs. And, Tour de France come to mind. Creatine is not a drug. It's a naturally synthesizing compound in the body. Most reputable companies, the best creatine comes from Germany. It's a product called Creapure. It's a really scrutinized form of creatine monohydrate. But at the end of it, if the product has creatine monohydrate on it, you can rest assured that evidence is supporting that.
Oh, I'm so glad you just said that. You just sold for me our creatine because that is the creatine we use from Germany. So I'm curious, when people are out there looking for a creatine to buy, there's now creatine with a lot of different things added to it, like salts, proteins, things like that. So is there a benefit to these other ingredients with the creatine?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So there is some potential benefits when you combine creatine with other compounds. The first thing that comes to mind is protein. Primarily whey has been shown from an evidence-based research that the combination has been shown to put on greater amounts of lean tissue mass or strength. But there's other compounds that are mainly for athletes called beta-alanine or sodium bicarbonate. When you add creatine to that, it seems to have some advantageous effects there. Creatine and caffeine is a bit mixed. Some studies show some benefits, some don't. But there are some other benefits with ingredients. But one of the best things to do to increase creatine uptake into the muscle is exercise. Muscle contractions seem to do that as well.
So creatine monohydrate, what we're taking. So is creatine something different than creatine monohydrate, or we're just shortening the word?
Yeah, so monohydrate meaning one water molecule linked to creatine. And again, creatine is kind of a cool product. It degrades at a pH of about 2 or less, about 3 or less. But the pH of the stomach is lower than that. So creatine is very unique. Unlike other proteins, it remains intact when it goes through the GI tract. And when it leaves the small intestine and goes to your portal vein, when it gets in the blood, it's identical to what the liver was actually synthesizing, or the brain. So that's why monohydrate is the one we all use from a research perspective. So rest assured, it's identical or near identical to the thing you're producing. And that's, again, why the safety profile is so exceptional. It's not a foreign particle that the body doesn't recognize. Yes.
I was telling you I had one more myth, because I have a lot of girl listeners. And I asked a bunch of friends one day why they don't like taking creatine. And the biggest response was, well, it makes me feel bloated all the time. And so are they just taking too much?
Typically, yes. So what we've done with the young females primarily is really reduce that dose to maybe 3 to 5 grams. And then we break that up into more frequent dosages. So I think if you're susceptible to bloating, do not do the loading phase. Start with as little as 3 grams a day, and then divide that up into 1.5 in the morning in water or food, and then take 1.5 a little bit later on. Do that for about, 7 or about a week to 2 weeks. See how you do. And then after that, you can slightly move up to 5 and still divide that if you want into 2 by 2.5 gram dosages. Or if you want to take it all at once, that's fine. I think you're right. The error is they're taking way too much at first, maybe following the loading phase. And then that definitely adds about 1 to 3 kilograms in the first week. We've had individuals in some of our studies that add 9 pounds of water retention in the first week on the loading phase. So most individuals, especially young females, say, not a chance. This is making me big and bloated. I hate it. I'm not taking it. Yeah.
So creatine can be so amazing for women, especially like we've talked about, the heart, the brain, the bones, the muscles. But there's this bad rap out there that it will just bulk women up. And so is that just the marketing we're hearing from, the fitness industry, or what do you think?
It's probably where it started. The vast majority of research are in young males who got bigger, stronger, faster. And unfortunately, young females, middle age, and of course, older adults are so underrepresented. But I'm really fortunate to work with a lot of colleagues, primarily in the United States, that are really starting to make female the main focus of creatine research, again, going back to these health benefits. So for any of the females watching, please don't be scared to either increase creatine in your diet or at least do a little bit of homework on supplementation. You're not going to get big and bulky. If you're worried about that, start with a really, really low dose. Or if you're emphasizing it through the diet, that's an extra serving of seafood or red meat a day. But if you're a vegan, vegetarian, and plant-based diet emphasizer, that can't happen. So again, look at it from a really, really longevity or lifelong perspective. Don't do the loading phase. Start really low and work yourself up. And I think that might help solve a lot of the issues. We've done that for our research participants, and it's really worked favorably.
So as we wrap up here, I'm curious your thoughts, because creatine just overall gets the worst rep. When I started selling it, people are like, I cannot believe you're selling this supplement. Like, this is not a good supplement. This is only for huge, big bodybuilders that aren't taking care of their body in the first place. So why is there such a bad rap out there about creatine?
Yeah, and I think to that point, it was, it's got a main research emphasis in 1992, and it was always around young males getting bigger, stronger, faster. And I'm really happy to see that there's health benefits of creatine finally coming out in experimental studies. It's a really, really big focus area worldwide. And I do believe there's a huge positive from social media getting the information out, because before I would publish a paper, but if it was in like the medicine or the Library of Science in the United States, only academics would read it. But now we have this fantastic platform called social media. It can put out misinformation, but this is a great avenue, like what we're doing today, to get evidence-based research out to a lot more viewers. And I think that's why it's starting to evolve globally, that, hey, it's not as bad as we once thought. There's potentially a lot of good things there. They're not huge effects. I use the analogy, exercise is the cake, but protein will be the nice chocolate icing on it, and creatine might be the sprinkles to allow someone to maybe choose that and eat it a bit more. The effects are there, but the best effects come when you combine it with exercise. for the most part, without exercise, creatine doesn't have a lot of big effects.
Okay, so I have a personal question because I have a 18-year-old daughter, 21-year-old son, 23-year-old son, and 25-year-old son who are they all work out at the gym. They're all concerned about building muscles and keeping fit and eating healthy. They do take different supplements, but if someone in that age range is listening to this, like my kids, would you suggest they start on creatine now and take it the rest of their lives every day?
That population experiences the best benefits because they have such precious muscle quality that they can actually put on more repetitions, get stronger, build that body up. So just think of a mountain. If you're building the mountain up more, and it's sad, but the fourth decade is when muscle mass starts to decrease, strength, bone mineral density starts to go down, balance and agility. But if you have a bigger surplus, when it does start to go down, you've started at a higher amount. So to answer your question, 1,000,000% yes. I'm assuming probably if they're taking supplements, creatine might be one of the compounds in there. If they're not, and if they do consume red meat or seafood, they could do it that way. It's not a necessary because they're healthy individuals, but by adding a small amount, again, you don't need a lot. This isn't protein, which is hundreds of grams. We're talking at most 10 grams a day from a whole body perspective. A small amount may allow your daughter to say, hey, I have more repetitions. I put on more lean mass. Now more lean mass is pulling on the bone. So when I get older, I might offset osteopenia. I might, if I fall, I'm not going to get a fracture. Your son might get stronger. So then performing activities of daily living when he's 80 and 90 is easier. The lack of strength is the number one reason people are placed in long-term care facilities. And the best overall variable where creatine and exercise seems to improve is by far strength. So again, if you're going to take it, strength is one of the main reasons I think you should consider it in combination with exercise.
Okay, let's help those 40-plus-year-old people since you've touched on that. And I fall in that category.
Yes, me too.
It's not too late, though. We can still build muscle mass and still use the creatine to help us build muscle mass.
Oh, yeah. You could be 80, 90, a centurion, 100%. You get profound benefits by moving. We just want people to move more often. And if you say, hey, I haven't worked out in 20 years, that's okay. Start immediately. Start slow. Get a personal trainer. Just get some help getting back into it. But dietary protein is going to be elevated. Creatine may be an ingredient in some of those protein foods, but we're actually seeing substantial anti-aging effects as we get older. Lean tissue mass goes up, strength, endurance, functionality, maybe helping the individual get off the toilet easier, out of bed easier, carrying groceries, and of course, some of the brain and bone benefits. So I agree, it's never too late to start. Exercise really is the foundation of youth. It's the only thing on our planet that has been shown to have anti-aging properties. No supplement will ever do that. If you exercise, you're doing way more than the global population. It doesn't take a lot. Resistance bands, little dumbbells, walking the stairs, whatever serves your purpose. We just need to move and move more often.
Oh, I love that advice. Thank you for clarifying on all of that. Okay, one last question. I know we're getting close to time here, but you talked about anti-aging, and we've talked about that throughout the show. And we were talking about how it benefits the brain, but I don't know if I asked you this. Have you done studies? Are there studies out there? Because we know it's beneficial to the brain, you said, with memory and brain cognition. But are there certain studies for things like dementia?
So we're starting one in Iowa, actually in the winter term. And then there's actually a study now, I believe, out of Kansas looking at Alzheimer's. There's only been one study done on concussion in children, and it had some ability to speed up concussion there. We don't see a lot of great promise in Parkinson's, Huntington's, or MS, but muscular dystrophy, young boys with muscular dystrophy are showing the benefits there. So all of these studies, I would say the next 20 or 30 years, you're going to see a huge global push on research above the neck. So increasing brain bioenergetics, different areas of the brain. Could this help improve memory, cognition, offset neurological diseases such as dementia and Alzheimer's? So it's in its infancy. There's potential there. So I'm super excited for the next 2 or 3 decades if we can get some randomized control trials to have some application for those clinical populations. Yeah.
And I've been seeing more and more studies about creatine. So is it just because it's becoming a trendy topic these days, or why are we getting more and more studies done on it?
Yeah, I think it's sort of sparked our interest that, a lot of cells besides muscle use creatine for energy, and creatine is actually having so much application. it seems to be really, really hot topic right now and popular, probably from a global research perspective because of the variety of benefits that we always thought it was for athletes, but now we're actually seeing it for everybody. And again, that's why I think it's really, really popular. Again, that there's no real negative trade-offs, no adverse side effects taken at a regular or recommended dosage, and there's only the upscale upswing from it.
All right. Well, so good to know. You have taught us so much. You have answered so many questions for me and my followers. I know I'm going to refer this episode quite often because of all of the questions and, myths I get about creatine. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I always end my podcast episodes with asking my guests what they have found to be the best ingredient in life. And it can't be creatine. It's got to be something else than
Absolutely.
creatine.
In addition to love and family, exercise, I think, is probably the best ingredient. I mean, I would put travel in there as well, but I think at the end of it, if you're exercising, you're doing so much for life. You're doing every facet, emotional, psychological, physiological. And by doing that, you've really improved your longevity. And I'm sure everything else around that goes well, for sure.
I do love exercise. That's a good one. All right. And also, where can my listeners find you if they want to learn more about creatine and learn more about what you're studying?
Right. I think at Instagram, so my handle's at Dr. Darren Candow. I try to post not only about creatine, but a lot of things to improve health and wellness. So at Dr. Darren Candow at Instagram seems to be the easiest. Yep.
Well, again, thank you so much for being here. I know you have taught my listeners so much. So thank you again.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. Remember to subscribe to the Just Ingredients podcast to learn more about your health and good ingredients to life. Plus, get daily tips at just.ingredients on Instagram.